Chicken Run is so good. It had no right to be that good, and it is that good. It came out in the year 2000, and it is still the highest grossing stop motion animated film of all time. I loved it as a kid. It's just kind of nice to revisit like a beloved childhood property and not have it come out as super problematic, because in this hellish year that is 2020, that's unfortunately rare. There's an exception to this.
Raise your hand if ill.
We're just going to pretend that no one voices Rocky. Aside from that though, it slaps. Revisiting it as an adult has just proven how kind of unfortunately relevant the themes in it still are, and it is exactly the kind of film that needs spotlighting in these most questionable times. It's not a subtle film, and you know what? Good. The time of comprehending subtlety came and went for me, somewhere between murder hornets and US government releasing footage of UFOs. We're into Act 2, Scene 2 of 2020 now. Cannibal rats, genetically modified mosquitoes, and the British far right have entered the scene. The US and British governments are trying to roll back rights for trans folk. Subtlety. Spoon feed me those revolutionary messages. Oh yeah, let me drink them down deep. The plot of the film is based off the 1963 World War II movie The Great Escape, starring Steve McQueen, and full disclosure, I haven't seen it. I'm not judging this film based on its merit as an adaptation or a reimagining. I just want to watch Chicken Run as its own thing and talk about my interpretation of it. When putting this together, I wanted to list literally everything I love about it, but if I did that, I would be here all day. So instead, I've just rounded it off to my top 3. And here they are. Mrs. Tweedy is such a great villain because, on the obvious side, she is terrifying. She is cold, violent, selfish, you get the gist. But if you read into Mrs. Tweedy's situation, there's a few things that jump out. The Tweedys' marriage is clearly an unhappy one. We get a glimpse into their wedding day, and the image is very blurry, but it doesn't exactly look like two people excited to start their lives together. We learn throughout the film that Tweedy's farm is inherited, egg farmers who pass down the farm father to son for generations, which makes it fair to assume Mrs. Tweedy marries in.
But we've always been egg farmers. My father, and his father, and all their fathers.
So, when we think about the antagonists' and protagonists' motives...
And that's what we want! Freedom!
I'm sick and tired of making minuscule profits.
We should keep that in mind. So, why does Mrs. Tweedy care so much about profit?
Militia Tweedy will be poor no longer.
Mrs. Tweedy uses profit to get a sense of agency and power. We know what Mrs. Tweedy's ideal of success looks like, it's this guy here. Note how her facial expression changes when she looks over at Mr. Tweedy. If his job and home has been passed down, then he's never had to think about his place in the world as she has. The resentment she shows him leads me to believe she may have come from poverty herself, and despite not loving Mr. Tweedy, married him for the sake of having some kind of financial independence. In media, when we see women actively engage in capitalism, we see women use money as a means to establish freedom and security they may not have previously had access to, whether that money is through a job or marriage. Something we don't often get to explore as a negative aspect to this is the ways in which women get distracted by capitalism. One of the ways women have pushed for equality is in the workplace, which, don't get me wrong, is good and necessary. But one of the dangers in pushing the idea that women will be free from sexism and find hitherto unknown freedom and security if they simply become a #girlboss is it doesn't actually do anything to challenge the system that oppresses women in the first place. More women being on the Fortune 500 list hasn't changed that women overall are still disproportionately affected by rising poverty. And in Mrs. Tweedy, I see an excellent example of a woman who has fallen for the myth that getting money will make her equal to the rich man in that catalogue. Because let's be real, when she says,
Woman's touch makes the public feel more comfortable.
It's a certain kind of womanhood, a more traditionally middle-class kind. If she tried to market herself as who she is, someone who gets her hands dirty, who is frequently angry and even sexually aggressive, she knows people would be put off by that. Yes, because of misogyny, but also because of classism. As a side note, I definitely think there is a Miss Trunchbull-esque reading of her character, where either humour or horror is derived from the fact that a female character is acting more masculine. And she does also fall into the unfortunate trope of a woman becoming too powerful to handle it and going mad, as seen time and again. Women wearing an excess of dark eyeshadow can only mean two things: she's finally going through her emo goth phase, or she's gone mad with power. There is no in between. This doesn't change the fact that she is a great villain, and no matter how legitimate her reasons are, which is basically that she wants the exact same thing the chickens want.
I'm sick and tired of making minuscule profits.
And that's what we want, freedom.
The way she keeps the workers of that farm under her violent, exploitative boot isn't okay. And it's because of her falling for the individualist, profit-driven mindset that she eventually loses everything and self-destructs, unlike the chickens who collectively rise up and seize their freedom. Speaking of collective, let's talk about the chickens. I don't think it's a stretch to say they have a pretty terrible existence. The chickens are supposed to spend their lives laying eggs, the eggs get taken by the Tweedies, they make the profit, and the chickens get paid for this labour in chicken feed. If the chickens don't stick to this, they are cruelly punished, often with violence, not to mention as soon as the chickens, for whatever reason, are no longer able to produce eggs, they are then taken out to a woodshed and horribly killed by Mrs. Tweedy under a giant graph monitoring profits. When talking about people who menstruate under capitalism, we have to acknowledge that the primary role, historically, was for us to make babies. We were responsible for maintaining the workforce by providing workers. It's one of the many reasons our bodies have been policed so heavily throughout history, and why access to contraception and birth control has also been policed. Whilst having and taking care of children, we were also expected to take care of the home and do all the cooking and cleaning for free. This is known as reproductive labour, and it hasn't been valued in history, and really, it's still not valued now. Chicken Run feels like a film specifically critiquing reproductive labour, how it's not seen as valuable, how it's historically exploited people who menstruate, how it's not respected in a capitalist and patriarchal society. We see this in the way the chickens are killed if they refuse, or aren't able to, provide eggs, and that they're expected to do this and not want more for themselves or face the wrath of solitary confinement at best. The fact that the chickens talk about their own eggs as products to be sold and bartered with instead of anything meaningful to them shows how years of poorly compensated reproductive labour has affected them. Either way, the chickens' freedom is emphasised by showing the chickens deciding to have chicks at the end of the film. They're not forced to have children for the sake of maintaining a workforce or profit. They're doing it because they choose to. And isn't that the ultimate symbol of freedom? They're also not all forced to undertake all the responsibility of reproductive labour. They clearly all share the responsibilities of childbearing and taking care of the home, not for the sake of profit, but for harmonious living and hope for the future. Chicken Run shows that being a woman doesn't exempt you from exploitative systemic sexism. It explores how reproductive labour dehumanises people who menstruate, and consistently devalues them and the work they do, regardless of class. The last thing I wanted to say on this was I wanted to at least acknowledge that there's absolutely a reading of Mrs. Tweedy as a representation of power-hungry white womanhood. There's a great article on Vox about white women's complicity in slavery, and particularly the segment that talks about white women profiting from black women's reproductive labour. Like, the parallels are there. The reason I've not gone more into detail with this reading is because I would be afraid of doing the subject a disservice and accidentally leaving crucial things out. The best middle ground I figured in this is just to recommend channels that I know discuss portrayals of race and racism in media. All their work is of a really high caliber, so I just really recommend following them anyway. Especially Intellectual Media and Princess Weeks. Their work is so good and they're some of my favourite content creators on YouTube, so yeah, go follow them. Every single character in Chicken Run serves a really important purpose. I know that should go without saying because, like, any character in a film should serve a purpose, otherwise, why are they in the film? Well, sometimes that doesn't always happen, especially in films with a large ensemble cast. Chicken Run is not that kind of movie. Every character is iconic in their own way. So first we have Ginger, who is the heroine we deserve in 2020. She's a freedom fighter, she's brave, she's honest, she's loyal, she's stubborn, and sometimes she's smug and morally superior, so she's not perfect.
She don't think we're valuable.
She cares deeply about fairness and justice, and above everything,
That's what we want, freedom!
she is the leader of this grassroots resistance and serves as the active voice for change. I feel like you can sum up Ginger's entire relationship with the other chickens in this one line.
You know what the problem is? The fences aren't just round the farm, they're up here, in your heads.
So Ginger's purpose, essentially, is to radicalise and organise the chickens. What about the other characters? There's Mac, who essentially works as Ginger's second in command. You never see Mac question the fact that they need to escape. She's always supportive of Ginger, but without being a pushover. She's crucial for obvious reasons. Babs and Bunty are slightly more complicated. But first of all, a quick tangent about Babs. She's the autistic representation we deserve. She's stimming in literally every scene we see her in. She takes things literally, she's dyspraxic, she struggles with her executive function and memory, she struggles with change even in a situation where it's for the better. Also, this is kind of heartbreaking. I know it's a running joke in the film that every time someone she knows disappears, she asks if they've gone on holiday, and it's just played as a quirk. But when I thought about it, I realised that the chickens wanted to reassure Babs that she wouldn't be frightened about the chickens being taken and killed. So every time a chicken is chosen by the Tweedies, the other chickens must have told her that they've gone on holiday so she won't get upset, realising that was kind of painful. She's only made fun of once, and it's not portrayed as funny. It's shown as Bunty not coping with disappointment yet again, so she lashes out at Babs. But also Mac defends her. Protect Babs at all cost. But outside of this representation, Babs and Bunty serve as a great voice box for people who, when encountering revolutionary ideas, aren't open to it, even if in the long run it would benefit them. After Edwina is killed, Bunty says,
"Well, perhaps it wouldn't be empty if she'd spent more time laying and less time escaping."
Bunty would like to think that, wouldn't she? That if you work hard enough, like her, you'll be protected by the system. But the film later makes the point by Mrs. Tweedy getting the pie machine. It doesn't matter how hard you work as an individual. At some point, you're going to run out of things to give, and in a system that just constantly demands more eggs, more profit, and you're already giving everything you've got, what then? Or what if what you produce suddenly loses value? What are you supposed to do? Because even if Bunty appears to be the top egg layer in the farm, Mrs. Tweedy still wants more money. Even if they'd never escaped and everyone had gotten on with laying eggs instead of trying to break out, Bunty still would have been killed as soon as she was no longer able to lay eggs. No matter what, her life is much shorter in this system than it is compared to freedom. And this idea that there's an equal chance all chickens would be kept safe if they just get on with it, work hard, lay eggs, essentially a meritocracy, still doesn't account for the fact that your lifespan is shortened either way, and there's potentially a whole host of reasons, as proven by Edwina not being able to lay eggs while Babs could lay up to 5 in one sitting, that someone may not be able to lay eggs in any given week. Therefore, not all the chickens are being given an equal chance at survival. Ginger actually makes a point to this.
So laying eggs all your life and then getting plucked, stuffed and roasted is good enough for you, is it?
It's a living.
But that's the point, isn't it? It's not. That's not a life. Babs nearly gets taken by the Tweedies, realises she's safe, and appears to have a eureka moment.
Oh, my life flashed before my eyes. It was really boring.
If she'd followed that, her life wasn't fulfilling because all the labour she was doing was so she could line the Tweedies' pockets while she saw no payoff from all her hard work. That's often where revolutionary anger and action comes from. The chicken feed immediately distracts her from this moment. The chickens rush to gorge themselves on the only kind of small pleasure they get, and Ginger is the only person that realises that doing this is exactly what the Tweedies want and playing right into their hands, because even in engaging in this small pleasure, you are still contributing to the Tweedies getting richer. Both these reactions to revolutionary ideas and feelings are understandable to me. If you've spent your entire life trying to survive in an environment where you have to produce non-stop or risk not having your basic needs met, or even a preventable early death, you can then imagine that not doing that producing and not going along with the rules is an inherent risk. And you watch enough people die, it's easy to think that's all life is and all it can be. And that's why it's important that for every Babs or Bunty, there's a Mac and a Ginger. And the thing about Babs and Bunty is when it all kicks off, the skills they can bring to the table are priceless. Look at Bunty go. She is doing manual labour and laying eggs so they can trade for tools at the same time. Look at Babs thriving on being able to contribute with her special interest. They're both valuable and crucial to escaping, and because they both know Ginger cares about them as much as herself, they're open to hearing her when she says things like,
The chances of us getting out of here are 1,000,000 to 1.
Then there's still a chance.
I hope we all have people like Ginger in our life. Speaking of, it's important that Ginger isn't the symbol of this revolution. That honour goes undeservedly, at least initially, to Rocky. The purpose of Rocky in this film is one that feels very relevant right now. When a figure offers themselves as a solution to the situation you're trapped in, they promise you they will help you free yourself and finally overcome the system, and then for whatever reason they don't get voted in. What then? When Jeremy Corbyn lost the election last December, I cried all night. And this f***ing scene, it took me back. And doesn't that just highlight the problem with placing all your hopes on one person? There's a great video essay by YouTuber Kathrin. In her video talking about the portrayal of rebellion in Rick and Morty, she talks about something called the Great Man Theory, which is a theory that throughout history, important social change can often be put down to individual great men that front entire movements, which means when something happens to these men, all hope is lost and the movements fall apart. Kathrin goes into more detail with this theory, and also her work is amazing anyway, so go and subscribe if you want to find out more. I love the fact that Chicken Run explores the Great Man Theory whilst also clearly showing its failings, and how to keep momentum after such a loss. The chickens allow despair in for an afternoon, they fight among themselves, but in the midst of all the fighting, Fowler comes along with the right message in the wrong context. He talks about how unity is important when fighting an enemy, just like they did in his RAF days, which is why he won a medal. We'll come back to Fowler. Either way, Ginger snaps them out of it by being pragmatic, formulating a plan that values the different skills that everyone can bring to the table and not allowing morale to dip too low after the loss of Rocky as a figurehead. It's a small detail that once plans are underway and everyone's doing the work, they leave the poster of Rocky up on the plane, which I like to take as a reminder that no one single person is going to single-handedly free them. That will come from the chickens all working together. That's why it's so important that Ginger isn't the symbol, because Ginger recognises that a movement is never about one individual person, or chicken, or rooster. It's about lots of different people coming together to enforce change. Also, although symbols have power, they're just aesthetics if they're not met with action. Plus, as we can see, they are ripe for misinterpretation and abuse. Meaningful change comes from action, and that is what Ginger stands for. Circling back to Fowler, I would actually be really interested in people's interpretation of him in the comment section, because of all the characters, I struggle to place my feelings down about his character the most, especially in the context of how I've read the rest of the film. He's probably the character I like least, not that that says much because honestly I love all the characters including him. I suppose the reading I found most interesting with Fowler is he's someone who in many ways has all the makings of a revolutionary. The military taught him some great skills in this way, the importance of camaraderie, knowing that infighting will only benefit the enemy that you're facing. He's loyal if a little bit stiff and distant, after all he is British. He values bravery and doing the right thing. The military has warped those skills to suit a mindset that's still about having power over your peers. If you're treated as more important by the society you live in compared to others, it makes sense that, after a while, you start to see yourself that way too. It's only once he literally gets brought down a peg by having his medal slapped out of his hand that he starts to really muck in with the chickens when it comes to their escape plans, and work as an equal to them, not act like a superior. Fowler to me also acts as a warning for not allowing national pride to blinker you from the fact that your love of the British flag hasn't saved you from still living in an oppressive system, even if you're slightly higher up on it than other people. Like, we've all met someone who gets a bit weirdly intense over national pride, right? Like, let's be real, that's not just tears of joy, that's 100% Fowler just...
I wanna the Queen.
Fowler's arc of recognising being a symbol for a time or fight gone by is meaningless if you're not willing to fight for liberation now is done really well. I like that it's only once he's stepping up to contribute to their escape with action that he gets his medal back. But if anyone else can think of any other readings of Fowler, I'd be really interested to hear about them, just because There's lots of ways I think he could be read. Leave your comments and I'd love to read them. Also, you could just comment and like and subscribe in general if you felt like it. The thing that strikes me about the characters in Chicken Run is the way they're used to emphasise the importance of community. How when building a genuine grassroots resistance, there is room for people from all walks of life, and a whole host of different skills are needed and valued when fighting for freedom. Even the crooks, who Ginger doesn't like, play a crucial part in this, because without their looting, many invaluable resources that the chickens needed to collectively build something to seize their freedom wouldn't have been accessible. Every contribution matters. No one person is held as more important than the rest of the movement. Everyone is important. Every life has value. Rewatching Chicken Run for this video, there was a shot that really stood out to me that I'd never noticed the first time around. It's not this one, it's not this one, and it's not this one. It's this one. Who is this chicken? Why is this the last chicken we see after having spent so much time with the other characters? I love this shot because to me, it says everything about what Chicken Run puts forward as freedom. It is everything Ginger said in this moment.
There's a better place out there. It has wide open spaces and lots of trees. Can you imagine that? Cool, green grass. We feed ourselves. There is no farm. There's no morning egg count, no farmers, no dogs and coops and keys, and no fences.
And we get to see that. We see the optimism in the chickens having children. The last thing Ginger says is
it as good as you imagined?
No. It's better.
And in this shot of this random chicken, it's true freedom. People, or chickens, who Ginger never even seemed to know that well, are really living, finally for the first time, and it's peaceful. There's no pressure to produce, no profit to think about, you're safe. Comparing freedom as Mrs. Tweedy understands it to the chickens is really stark, even in the way both these plans could play out if they're both successful. One of the things I kept returning to in writing this script was the realisation that Mrs. Tweedy's plan was actually terrible. Even if the chickens hadn't escaped, I don't understand how she could have made money in the long run, and actually she would have lost money. What's her plan exactly? Get all the chickens, put them in the pie machine, mass produce them into pies. Then what? Genuinely, then what? Mrs. Tweedy's plan has no sustainability. It's just one big gesture that she hopes will make her a lot of profit with no long-term goal for how to sustain that money that isn't based off the work of the chickens. The chickens' plans, on the other hand, are all based around long-term planning, construction, planting fruits and vegetables, everyone chipping in and helping. Freedom is found in the collective for the chickens, and Mrs. Tweedy trying to find freedom in individualism, well, we see what happens to her. Hang on a second here though, you know what's really dark? Is Mr. Tweedy trying to stop the gates from falling here and failing, which is very in character, or is he the one that actively pushed them down, essentially killing her? Comment below, I can't make up my mind. If she does die in that scene, the fact that Mrs. Tweedy dies in the ruin of a machine that she single-handedly bought in herself to put the chickens through so that they could all become uniform products to make money. Poetic cinema. Actually, the real poetic cinema is this montage. The contrasting of Mr. Tweedy anxiously trying to rebuild the machine Ginger and Rocky broke whilst fearing the boot, whilst the chickens are collectively deconstructing and repurposing every single thing used to enslave them to rebuild their own machine that will be used for freedom. That is real poetic cinema. I get so hyped when I rewatch this scene because it reminds me of the power of the human spirit when movements come together for radical change. What Chicken Run suggests real freedom is wonderful. It's free education. It's crime not really being an issue anymore because all your needs are being met. It's free care and support provided by the community. It's the freedom to have children as and when you want. It's living off the land in a way that seems ethically resourced. It's time with people you love. It's helping out in your community. It's having a quiet moment to stop and pick some flowers. And those are all the main things I love about Chicken Run. Apart from these last few things because I just had to at least reference them because they're too good not to mention. Okay, speed round. The music is beautiful, John Powell should just always be employed by DreamWorks. Fletcher is hilarious.
After you, Fetcher.
After I what?
This shot of Babs having the time of her life. The fact that this tree has Bunty Hearts Fowler carved into it is a sweet detail, although let's be real, if the film was being honest, Fowler would be Arrow and Bunty and Babs would be a couple. The Crux giving up their eggs to help Ginger even though it's painful because they still value Ginger's life above selfish profit. Enemies to lovers done really well. A healthy couple that learns from each other and grow as people and a change for the better having known each other at the end of the film. The film highlighting the importance of creating as much joy as you can even in an oppressive system and how creating those moments of joy can be an act of defiance in and of themselves. Ooh, and I'll slow this one down. One of the genuine best depictions of policing and rebellion I've ever seen in a movie. The dogs and Mr. Tweedy clearly only serve the interests of Mrs. Tweedy. They don't protect the chickens at all, and after a long time of public punishments and abuse, it gets to a point where they finally... Attack! And let me just say, whether in Chicken Run or in real f***ing life, protesting like this is an understandable and expected endpoint to being treated like shit by a force that repeatedly abuses you for the sake of protecting an oppressive system. Rioting, looting, they all have an important place in rebellion and fighting for freedom, whether that's in Chicken Run or the world in 2020. Okay, last but not least, a really quick gush about Aardman Studios. I've loved Aardman ever since I was a kid because of Wallace and Gromit. Wallace and Gromit was a huge part of my childhood. The way Nick Park is able to give these characters so much depth with the writing and animation style speaks to his skill as a director and an animator. The fact that he reps the Northwest because he's from Preston is honestly so pure to me, although admittedly I'm pretty biased about that because I'm a fellow Prestonian. I'm still waiting on that Wallace and Gromit statue you promised us, Preston Council. The thing about Aardman is their films are so quintessentially British, but it's in a way that doesn't make me want to yeet myself into the Thames. Whether it's referencing the Archers, or Toblerones, or Only Fools and Horses. I think the reason I love Aardman so much is because the national pride feels sweet and earnest as opposed to dogmatic and misguided. I also love that most of the villains I've seen in Aardman movies are people who are upper class. I don't see much demonization of the working class at all in Aardman films. In fact, if there's one message that I've seen repeatedly come through in Aardman movies, it's this.
They don't plot, they don't scheme, and they are not organised.
1 hour later.
I told you they was organised.
Get yourselves organised down there.
Even Preston, who as a character probably comes closest to stereotypical working class thug I've seen in Aardman media, he's made that way by his creators. It's technically not his fault he acts how he does. The themes in Chicken Run are definitely more relevant now than they were in the year 2000. Hopefully a sequel further emphasises some of the themes they've already set up. So, if you're finding life hard right now, which would be completely understandable as God knows I am too, maybe revisit some Aardman movies. Be reminded that different paths people take to resistance. And if you're losing hope, just remember what our 2020 hero Ginger says.
The chances of us getting out of here are 1,000,000 to 1.
Then there's still a chance.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second to highlight the Black Neurodiversity Assessment Fund that has been organised by Autistic Tyla. Getting an assessment for autism as an adult in the UK is really hard, and if you're Black it's even harder. If you have any money you can spare, you could legitimately help change someone's life with this money, so that would be a plate grace. That would be a great place to give it if you are able to. Also, subscribe to Autistic Tyla. She makes really great videos about being an autistic adult and the nuances of that. They're very informative. Go subscribe to her. And yeah, that is now everything. Alright, thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.
All quiet like.
Like a fish.
Yeah, and we... Like a fish?